for joining us today on what's going to be a very, very exciting conversation. This is the second time that we are hosting a webinar with Brianna on the back of the first one being spectacular, right? Like there were a ton of questions. We went over time. Despite of that, we could not answer a lot of questions that were there. And there was a lot of new things that came out, and things that were not necessarily intuitive, right? Um, so this is a follow-up conversation to that one, although we are going to keep it very, very straightforward, right? Like, so if you have not attended the previous one, you should be just fine. But I would still advise you to go back and watch the record. Those of you who don't know Brianna, let me do a quick introduction. So Brianna, today, right, like a lot of you might know her as the millionaire recruiter. I think that's the most popular name that she goes with. But Brianna started a very, very successful recruiting firm called Techies out of California, ran it for more than a decade, exited, right? Like her firm was acquired by another company, exited, and very recently she has joined Premier Financial Search as the director of recruiting. Brianna also runs fantastic training and coaching programs under Thriversity. So if you don't know, I would highly recommend you check it out. And in any case, uh, Brianna is one of the must follow people in the industry, right? Like she's active on LinkedIn. If you are not, I would highly recommend following Brianna, and try and make sure that she pops up in your timelines as much as possible, right? There's some great stuff that she posts out. All right. With all of this out of the way, Brianna, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us today. All right. So I'm going to do a quick kind of summary of our last conversation, at least the bits that were very interesting, right? Like, and where we are going to kind of dive a little bit deeper, right? So in the last conversation, we spoke about your journey as a founder, as an operator, the mistakes that you made, right? Like how do you hire, how do you fire, how do you promote, and some of the things that you said, right? Like were very, very interesting, and we got a lot of questions around those, right? Like, so one of the things that you said was that it's very difficult to scale a recruiting business beyond, that's about 15
Mhm.
recruiters with contingent only kind of a business model, right? Like, and we spoke about, hey, why do you need more predictability in cash flow? And while contingent is great, right? Like that's where your hunter instinct kind of kick
Yeah.
in, right? Like it's not the most scaling friendly business model. From there, we spoke about, hey, how do you acquire those large customers and things like that, right? Like, so one thing that came out was, hey, there is, you know, sales is super important, right? Like you most recruiters, you are, very instinctive hunters, but what's equally important is retention and delivery, and that's a little bit counterintuitive, right? And so that kind of took us on a journey. We looked at a ton of data across our customer base,
Mm.
and it turned out to be quite true, right? That's what we are going to dive down into, and there are great stories, right? Like as every founder has. So we will talk about some of those stories as well. Um, okay, so Brianna, as a founder, right? Like, and I know you are a hunter, right? Like you are. Um, how did you look at sales versus retention and this constant battle for yourself as a founder?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like when you say like as a hunter, salespeople are are finicky, right? And I actually just did this video yesterday, which is not on my YouTube yet. But the reason why I feel like a lot of recruiters fail is because we have shiny penny syndrome. Where we're like, ooh, what's the new, right? We get bored very easily. I think generally salespeople in any industry get bored really easily. We want to work on all the new stuff. If we don't close a role really quickly, we tend to get bored. And so I would say, especially in tech, we don't move as fast as perhaps other industries do. It's a little bit harder to close a role. It could take us anywhere from 3 weeks to maybe even 3 months to close some of our roles. So as you can imagine, like you get like a little stir crazy. So I would say that a lot of my recruiters got really excited when we brought in what I would call fresh meat. So when I brought in a fresh role or a fresh client, they tended to want to jump on it as opposed to our normal clients or a normal rec. And so I think as a founder, that's a little frustrating, right? Because we have our clients who pay us, and who pay us regularly every single month. But the problem is it's not a fresh pitch. So what I would have to do is I would have to show them data and say, hey, this company pays us, every single year, they're 20%, 20 to 25% of our revenue every single year. And that's predictable revenue. So why in the world are you going to go work on a company that is not predictable revenue? So I would have to fight with that on a regular basis. And then back to like a recruiter filler, for example, like our database, why in the world are you spending all of your time on LinkedIn, which is not a predictable database, when we have warm leads in recruiter flow? So that goes to kind of the same point, whereas client, like warm clients versus, it's warm leads versus cold leads. So like every single year, I would get angry, I guess is the best word, frustrated, at my staff because we have warm leads versus cold leads, and they would constantly want to reinvent the wheel. So lots of recruiters, again, every single Friday or every single Monday, I should say, they would come in and it was like a new week. When in reality, it should snowball constantly. And the same thing goes with clients. It should continue to grow, to grow, to grow, to grow. And the relationship should continue to grow, to grow, to grow, to grow. And that's how you make the most money.
Absolutely. Now, there is something that you said that is very interesting, and I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into your experience. But before we do that, right? Like, so we looked at the same stuff, right? Like we looked at, hey, what's the kind of revenue concentration that successful, right? Like, so when I say successful, right, like those who have crossed at least $1 million in revenue, right? Like, so how much revenue has, so at least those who have crossed $1 million in revenue, what's the kind of revenue concentration that you would have, right? Like, so if you ask somebody, right, like intuitively, your answer would be that, hey, as you grow larger, your revenue concentration should decrease, right? Like, so essentially, top 20% of your customers, right? Like what's their revenue contribution, right? Like, so it should intuitively decrease because you are larger, you have larger customer base and all of that. But that's actually exact opposite of that is true, right? Like as agencies scale up in revenue, there is pretty much a very linear kind of a relationship where as they scale up in revenue, the revenue concentration increases, right? Which is true, right? Like it kind of blew my mind. You mentioned that, hey, you know what, right? Like we've got this very reliable customer. We've been working with them for years. 20-25% of our annual revenue comes from them, right? Like, do you have rough, numbers, maybe, right? Like maybe top 5 customers, what was the percentage revenue contribution
Yeah.
for you?
So it's actually kind of a double-edged sword. So I actually didn't want any of our customers to go higher than 20%. So
Right.
the customer that did hit 20%, almost 25% at one point, is the customer we resold to.
Right.
Because
Made sense.
Yeah, because that made sense, right? But I didn't want any customer to go under 50 over 15%, because then if they go away, that's a significant amount of revenue that goes away. So I paid very close attention to that. So that's, like when you think about COVID, for example, I wanted to make sure that although we were very niche in how we operated, I wanted to make sure that our industries weren't as niche, that if things happened in the world, our business didn't fail. So that's also something to think about when people think about niching down. Um,
Makes
so
sense.
so I had I had a commission sheet, is what I call it. I called a commission sheet. So I had all of our revenue really mapped out, even down to our customers. So I had the customers, I had how many deals we had at each, and the revenue percentage, not only, and even down to the deal percentage. So how much each deal was, down to the average deal. So I had
Wow.
everything down. So I knew exactly what every single time we placed something with them, and down to like everything. So I mean, I had salary info. So I mean, my data was on point. So I knew that if a recruiter wanted to work on, let's just say, a Dropbox. If a recruiter wanted to work on a Dropbox, I know, hey, this is going to be your average fee if you work on Dropbox. And this is going to be the revenue
Wow.
with that. So I didn't want a recruiter to shoot in the dark. And that was really important, because then we needed to work backwards. So if a recruiter came to me and say, hey, I want to make 300K this year, I go, great. Well, let's take a look at our customers, and now let's see who you want to work with. And then I'm going to tell you how long it typically takes for us to close a deal with them. And then now let's talk about what our closing rate with that customer is. So we're going to look at all of that data and make sure that they're in the right place. And then let's make sure that they should actually be our customers, because that's a whole other thing that I think that we need to talk about when it comes to where are we actually spending our time, and
Yeah,
should we double down on them? So all of that stuff matters.
absolutely. So that's a really, really important point, right? Like, so let's think about it from this perspective, right? Like your, your ability to scale your business, right, is dependent on, how well you are able to kind of acquire some of those, whales, right? Like some of those really, really large repeat customers, right? Like, and with
Mm.
every new search, it's easier for you to, place, because you know the culture, the team, the nuances,
Right.
all of that so well. So how did you identify, right? Like, hey, Dropbox is a go, but let's say Meta is a no-go, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just throwing out names here,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
what went into that decision-making process?
Oh, yeah. So it starts at the beginning, and it actually starts during the fee negotiations. I mean, of course, okay, let me say back. Obviously, it starts during the conversation, right? So if someone doesn't want to have a conversation with you, it's not a go, right? So
Yeah.
I think we go back to like the business development. Sometimes people are like, oh my God, they're just going to let me send resumes to them. That's all fine and dandy. Like sometimes, yeah, them letting you send resumes to you feels good, right? Okay, finally someone wants to talk to me. And sometimes that does work, right? But if they're not going to get on the phone with you, where's that relationship going to go? And it might feel good for that second. And okay, here's a good example of this. Um, I really liked this particular company, and I knew exactly what they wanted, and I really liked what they did. I don't know. I really liked the founder. I guess it was a sexy founder. Like
Yeah.
he sold a couple times before. I had a lot of people ask to get in there. There was a lot of reasons why I wanted to do it, right? So I had a couple of people. I sent a couple of blind resumes. Basically, he finally bit. The guy never wanted to talk to me. Never. But he signed my fee agreement. He ended up interviewing my people. Again, never wanted to talk to me. But yet, I have a signed fee agreement. I've got people going through the interview process. Still never wanted to talk to me. Okay. But I got people going through the process. And so I'm
Yeah.
kind of like, well, maybe this is still fine. Maybe I'll still make money from this, whatever. But at the end of the day, is that a client that I know I'm going to have like 20%, revenue? No, it's not. It's just one of those ones that I can dangle the carrot to get a lot of great engineers from because people want to work there. But it's not going to be the one that's going to boost my revenue on my commission sheet. It's just going to get a lot of engineers in the door that I'll probably place other places, that I'll build
Right.
with other clients. But it's not going to be the one that I'm going to have a great relationship with. And by the way, I never placed anyone with them.
That,
But I
that
placed a
that's
lot
that
of,
tells us so.
you know what I mean? But I placed a
Yeah.
lot of other engineers from that client. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
not that I took anyone from there, but you know what I mean? Like because I dangled that carrot and placed those engineers elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I think that
Absolutely.
people have to look at clients for different purposes, not necessarily because you're making money from them, but they serve different purposes.
And this also, in one of your videos, right? Like I've seen that, right? Like you talk about the importance of niching down, right? And this is where this, being a super niche, specialty recruiter kind of comes into play, right? Like right, like if you are not in a very particular niche, right? Like this kind of a playbook would not be possible, right?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense. Let me kind of flip this question then, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so we know how to identify, right? Like customers that we are going to go all out for, right? Like, hey, this is the client, this is the logo that has a possibility for me to, make my 10%, 15% of my annual revenue. You said that, okay, if they never talk to you, right, like that's a pretty big red flag that, hey, this relationship is probably going nowhere. What are some of the other things that you would look for in terms of saying that, hey, they might be a big brand, they might be, the best company in the world, but hey, I'm going
Yeah.
to pass on this. So what are some of the other
Yes.
things that you look for?
Yeah. So more red flags is if you're having trouble during the fee agreement process. So like if there are sticklers on certain things in your fee agreement, if you're having trouble there, if like there's stalls, there's red flags. If it's a long time, there's red flags because that just shows that the interview process is going to be also time consuming. If they have a long interview process that they're not willing to budge on, we know that there's going to be issues, right? If the hiring manager is not willing to talk to you and spend time with you, that's a red flag. If and you can look at reviews all you want. I don't know if I love I mean, I actually I know I don't love Glassdoor, but there's
Yeah,
also like Team Blind. That's a lot more legit that I would go on.
much better.
Much
Yeah.
better. Glassdoor is crazy. It's kind of like a Yelp, but Team Blind's great. So you definitely like look on
And they
stuff
also
like.
use Recruiter Flow. May I interject?
Oh, you did? Oh, I actually
They
didn't
do.
know that. I did not
Yeah.
know that. I will look on that now. Uh, but yeah, so those are things. But I think what's really, really, really important is as you're going through the process, and like, let's just say, here's how I set the scene. You always have to set expectations. And I say, the first 2 weeks are crucial. You're going to learn me, I'm going to learn you, and I'm going to send a few resumes and we're going to see how it goes. I'm going to see how my pitch goes. I'm basically going to market for you for the first 2 weeks. I'm going to hear how, the salary, comes from the other side. I'm going to see if that's, accurate. I'm going to see if people are interested. So I'm going to give you all of my feedback in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to need you to get back to me within the next 24 hours, 48 hours if things are hitting the fan, but I need you to get back to me. And we're just going to see how it goes. I'm going to give you my all for 2 weeks, and I expect the same. And then we'll see. So it's like a dating period.
Yeah.
But I'm very, very, very upfront that if it doesn't work in 2 weeks, it doesn't work. And I'm very upfront. And so, and it kind of like puts them on there like, oh, because nobody says that. And I think that that's what's really important is that you let them know that you have no trouble walking away. And when you say that, I think that lets them know that you respect yourself so much that you don't need them. And when you let them know that you don't need them, then it makes them think that you have so much stuff going on that, oh my God, they need you. And no one plays that game. And then when people think you're desperate, then they take advantage of you. So if you flip the script, I think it's really interesting. So anyways, so going back to the expectations is important. And then you're going to see how they show up. And if they don't get back to you, then you know that they're not serious. And then you always ask the question, if I find you the right person tomorrow, when can you hire them? Most companies will say immediately. But we know that's not true. So I say, no, seriously. If I send you the right person, when can you interview them? When can you hire them? When can you onboard them? Those are the 3 questions. And those are the legit questions that they have to answer. And then you'll actually see, because when can you onboard them? That's when it becomes really real for them. Because then because everyone says, oh, I can hire them tomorrow. But when can you have them in your office?
Because that's when all the bills come due, right? So
exactly. And do you have that plan? Do you have their 30, 60, 90-day plan? So that's important. And then beyond that, what's really important too is back to their interview process. What does that look like? What does the feedback look like? Who's interviewing? Oh, and by the way, if you're not available, who do I go to? That's important. And then here's my ultimate rule. If I have 3 people go into an on-site or final round, however you call that, and 3 people for the same role do not get an offer, I'm gone. That means they don't know what they're looking for.
Right.
Gone. And I tell them, by the way, this. I don't just like ghost them by any means, but I will tell them. So for example, I'll say, by the way, I want to make sure that we're calibrated. So how many people have already been to final on-sites for this role? And if they say none, I'm also a little worried. I don't like to recruit for a role that they haven't gotten wrong themselves, because they're going to try to get it wrong through me. I don't like that. I want to have got them wrong themselves, not wrong through me, because I'm contingency. So if they haven't gotten it wrong, I'm going to try to get a container. So for anyone that doesn't know what a container is a happy marriage between a retainer and a contingency. So I'll ask for 5 to 10K, non-refundable, so they can get it wrong with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So because it's a lot of time to get it wrong through me. And I will explain why it takes so much time and why, it's a lot of work, right? So I'll ask for that non-refundable container and they can get it wrong through me. And then, so we go through that, right? Now let's just say they've already gotten it wrong. And I'll say, hey, you've already had, 5 people on site. What have you learned from that? Have you recalibrated the role? Why did those 5 people not get an offer? What happened? And then we got to talk through that. And if I feel like they've actually learned and they've gotten it, they now understand who they want, then we talk through that. But if I still feel like they don't know who they want, I might not take that role on if we can't talk that out. But I'll be very honest with them, because again, if I am contingency, I'm not just going to go through the motions and pray that I happen to find their, unicorn squirrel, whatever we're calling them these days, because it just doesn't make sense. So for everyone that's listening, if we're contingency, we don't just pray. We don't spray and pray. It's just not going to happen. Like, this is your time. This is your livelihood. So you really have to have those hard conversations with your clients. And by the way, this is your job. So you don't let anyone affect your ability to do your job. Like, you're not being disrespectful. You are actually, like, you have to have these conversations with them. This is why we're really good. Like, you have to have that. You have to say, what are you like, not in a disrespectful way, like, what are you doing? But it's like, hey, you guys are wasting your time. Like I'm not here to continue to waste your time. So let's figure this out. Why did those 5 people not work? It doesn't seem like you're calibrated. So this is the good stuff.
Brianna, there is so much to unpack here. Um, of course, we don't really have that much time, but
Yeah, sorry.
if there is one thing that I would take away from this is that, hey, if you have a logo, a client who treats you as a partner, right? Right. Instead of, hey, just another vendor or just, a repository of, that would throw resumes at me, right? Like if somebody really looks at you as a partner, right? Like that's where you want to invest. And for you to have that, uh, so it's kind of a little bit of a, power equation as well. And for you to have that, right? Like for you to actually have that confidence that, hey, you know what, right? Like I'm not going to waste your time or my time after a search that you yourself don't really have a lot of clarity about or budget or any of these. You haven't sorted out any of these problems, right? Like so, for you to be able to do that, you need to have a very healthy pipeline. So you need to be really, really good at BD, right? Like so, sales is still super important.
Mm.
Not a topic for today's webinar, but there is a ton of great content that Brianna has put out on YouTube, on LinkedIn, places like that. So you should definitely go check it out. It's kind of a gold mine, right? Like if you're starting up, you want to figure out how to have that pipeline where you are in this position, right? Like I would advise people check that out. Um, okay, so tell us a story, Brianna. Right? Like it's always. I think they are the most instructive, things that most the best way for everybody to learn. Right? Like help us understand, right? Like some of these veils, right? Like how did your relationship go? Because it's not right. Like if you start building a relationship with one hiring manager, from there you need to have ability to kind of maneuver into their org, go to some other hiring manager, right? Like and have a larger piece of the pie, right? Like so, can you help us understand, right? Like how did you go about doing this whole bit?
Yeah. So what's really interesting about hiring managers, and I feel like recruiters, we don't love hiring managers. Hiring managers don't love recruiters. I think that's the kind of overarching vibe, right? But when we unpack that, we need each other. So I think once you realize that we need each other and that we can make our lives a lot easier when we kumbaya together, I think that's when I realized, wow, we can make our jobs a lot easier. So, and in reality, hiring managers are expected to do a whole lot of things and they're just frustrated. So, hiring managers, one, were never trained to be hiring managers. They don't want to be hiring managers. What they want to do is do the job that they were hired for. They don't want to be recruiters. They don't want to interview. They just want more people on their team, period. Right. And they don't even know how to articulate who they want because, again, they weren't trained to do that. We were trained to do that. And so what I learned was I just want to make their lives easier. And so that's what I would tell them. So I would start the conversation like that. Hey, I want to give you time back. So let me help you give time back. And I want to let you do what you do best. And I'm going to do what I do best. So let's get down to it. And I'm going to let you talk to me as least amount as possible. And the moment I say that, all of a sudden they like kind of sink back and they're like, oh, thank God, and they're not being rude or disrespectful or anything. They're just like, thank God, like you get me. And they're just human. And so then they just kind of pour their souls out. and they just, they tell you so many things that maybe they shouldn't even tell you. Like they tell you all the bad things that, about their boss or their boss's boss or the business and the things that they're up against. And like, it's kind of crazy. You become their therapist faster than you even realized, which is really interesting. I feel like I could write a book about that. But that's how I felt like I opened up a lot of doors. And then that's how I got a lot of referrals. Because here's the thing, like when you think about who your friends are, you're friends with a lot of the same types of people, right? So a lot of, let's say, engineering managers who tend to be, or directors of engineering tend to be my hiring managers. Guess what? They're friends with a lot of, well, directors of engineering at different companies. So that's how all of the referrals come from. Or then flash forward to when directors of TAs now become my hiring managers or the people who open the doors for me and sign my fee agreements. Guess what? Now they're my referrals and recommendations and stuff like that. So then what happens? Well, I also become friends with them. And guess what? I'm sending them swag bags, bottle of alcohol, whatever the heck, I send lots of bottle of alcohol, all of those things, right? You get to learn your audience. So I'm sending gifts all the time. And not just when hires are done, by the way. So that's the mistake that a lot of people make. A lot of people give things when hires are made. I'm sending stuff randomly, not when it's holidays, not when hires are made, randomly. Okay. That's what's really important. People want to be appreciated because their work, their companies aren't appreciating them as much. Right. So when you're just sending stuff just because, that also really, really matters, I think. Sending notes, sending happy birthdays, but not just a, hey, happy birthday because LinkedIn told you to, right? But sending a little bit more. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying like networking is really important. Go like that extra mile. All of that stuff really matters. And so going back to, opening the doors with like hiring managers and TA, I learned a long time ago that TA was my way in. Internals a long time ago, they were supposed to be our enemies. It's like we were taking their jobs and vice versa, and I learned a long time ago that was not the case. We started working with them. And then, flash forward or a flashback 3 years ago when all these, layoffs happened and all of a sudden we were enemies again. But it's like, no, that's not the case. We're buddies, so please don't think that we're competing against each other. Are there some people that still think that? Sure. But at the end of the day, like we're all in it for the same reasons. So you definitely have to make sure you're going about it the right way. And you're just talking to them about their troubles. And going back to what I stated was, hey, are you having a lot of people get to the last stage and not get an offer? Let's talk through that. Like, why? Like, isn't that annoying? God, I have a client that I worked through that, a few weeks back. And, now we fix that because they didn't know what they wanted. Let's talk through that. So it's about asking the right questions. So, man, to your point, whereas, you have to get that conversation first, but I do think that the confidence and your power comes from your question. So you don't always have to be in that seat to get that conversation, whereas you can ask the right question, I think. And then all of a sudden they're like, like, yes, please help me. And I think that that's like super powerful.
Yeah, no, you're right. And so this is one of the things that we try to do in our sales processes as well, right? And one metric that we religiously track is talk time. If you went on a call with a prospect, right? Did you get them to speak at least 35% of the total talk time, right? Like if the call was an hour long, right? Like did they speak at least 21 minutes? If not, you are not doing your job right as a sales, right? So how can we improve, right? Like at least 35%, one third, you should, if you're not able to get your prospect to open up to you, about their problems, about their challenges. What is it that they're looking to do, right? Like, how are you going to solve them, right? Like, if you just don't know the problem, right? Like, the the funny thing is that our, our customers, your hiring managers, these are really, really smart, accomplished people, but it doesn't mean that they will be able to articulate their problem very, very well. And as you just said, right, like, so you have to kind of, we call this process a, are you peeling the onion, right? Like, are you going to the next layer, are you going to the next layer, right? Like, and find the heart of the problem. And that's when, you have a Pandora's box that opens up. Okay, this is what we are, looking to solve. And then we figure out, right, like, hey, can we help you or not, right? Like, and if we can help you, fantastic. If not, right, like, hey, we suggest you some other ways to solve your problems. But yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. No, sorry, I'm loving this because I think of a job. Like they have this job description, and they're like, I need this, amazing person who does XYZ. You saw the job description, exactly what's on the job description, and this is why I do a sourcing map, right? I go, okay, great. I just did a sourcing map of your team. You want XYZ, yet no one on your team has XYZ. They have X. And then the hiring manager is like, oh. So the next question is, why do you need YZ when you only have X? And then the hiring manager has to articulate now how he or she expects me to go find the YZ when he only has X. And so that's the peeling of the onion that I love that you're talking about, because now they have to articulate how in the world I'm going to make this little magic potion appear when their own team doesn't have this magic potion. So
Yeah.
it's just being really realistic, because you do your homework. Once you do your homework and you put it right in front of their face, then it just becomes black and white. And I think that that's what's really important, is being black and white with certain things. Because again, we're not just magic, we're just realistic. And then what's important too is then saying, great, what on this job description can you train? Because this is what's going to make it a lot easier for me. And again, those are just conversations, because what I hate to hear, and sorry if I'm going to call some people out, I know, in this room, but what I hate to hear is, I'm going to find you your perfect candidate. There is no such thing. That will never come out of my mouth. I'm not going to find you your perfect candidate. I'm going to find you the fit that works for you, and the fit that works for the market, and the fit that works for the salary you've given me. Period. There's no perfect candidate, because that's going to set me up for failure. It's going to set you up for failure. It's going to set the candidate up for failure. You know what I mean? And that's not the relationship that we're talking about when we're talking about the whales that we're having, that we're talking about the long relationship. That's not the long relationship. If I'm saying that I'm going to find a perfect candidate, that's a one and done client. That's not the long relationship. So it's all about how you set expectations. That's the long relationship. And that's what's really important, I think, because that's sustainability. And that's what's important. So I think that's something that we actually haven't really addressed, is sustainability, because when you want a client for a really long time, and you want a client to have significant amount of revenue year after year after year, you also have to make sure that you're picking a client that has sustainability, that actually looks at hiring in a way that is sustainable. Because, I actually had, now you never really know, but I had a client, I won't mention them by name, who I did have tons of revenue for 2 years, but I knew that the way that they were spending, I knew that it would leave. I didn't know when, but I knew that there was no way that it was going to continue like this, because they were reckless. But I knew I was going to pump as much hiring into them as they would let me, but I knew there was no way it was going to last. But it lasted for 2 years. So as a business owner, you have to realize, like, when to turn it on, but know that it's not going to last. Right. So that's something to think about too.
Yeah, I mean, see, the way I look at it is some of these you earn these stripes, you earn these scars by actually fighting the battle, right? Like,
Yeah.
and um as a first time founder, sometimes you just have to take that loss, right? And it's
Yeah.
that's the name of the game. But this is a brilliant framework here, right? Like, so let me kind of summarize the discussion today before we throw it out for Q&A. So those who are joining in later, there are quite a few of those. So there is a Q&A section in your Zoom toolbar, right? Like at the bottom. If you have any questions, just feel free to drop them right over there. So today we talked about sales versus retention, right? And and the fact that you have to, how do you decide? And the answer lies in having impeccable amount of data, right? And saying that, hey, hey, this customer is a very reliable customer, and we bill them XYZ amount every year. That's number one. Number two is having a relationship that is that's a relationship of equals is super important for you to set yourself up for a long-term success, right? Like, if you're not able to set hard boundaries, define, hey, this is what we are going to do, this is for you, this is what you are going to do for us. And if those things are not delivered, right, like this is not going to work out, right? Like, you need to be in that position. For you to be able to do that, right, like you need to ask your hiring managers, your clients, the right kind of questions, right? And to be honest, right, like as a founder, right, like if you have a very healthy pipeline, it helps you say no to business that's wrong for you, right? Like, almost every successful founder in this industry that I've spoken to has told me the same thing. And there is a long time back, I think 4 years back, there is a podcast that I did with a founder called Tracy Nickel from Summit Search Consultants. I asked her, hey, what is one of the biggest mistakes in your founder journey that you regret? And this is what she said. Early on, I basically said yes to whatever business I could get. And
Mhm.
and I set myself back by a couple of years. I should not have done that. Right. So, and again, some of those things that these founders have learned, and you don't need to repeat the same mistakes. You can learn from theirs, right? So, um, and it is super important to keep building on cultivating those relationships, understanding, having an understanding who are going to be your whales, who are going to be those customers who are going to contribute 15-20% of your annual revenue. Keep building on those relationships. Don't let those relationships be purely transactional. um, and you have yourself a formula to really scale. And if you want, have a fantastic exit. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been another stellar, very educational session with Brianna. Over the course of next 1 week, we will send out the recording over to you on email. Um, and hey, if you are not following Brianna already on her LinkedIn or YouTube, please do that. She's one of my favorite people to follow, and I eagerly look out for stuff that comes out on her LinkedIn. And Brianna, thank you so much for doing
Thank
this again.
you.
This is golden.
This is great. Great, a great subject. I really appreciate it. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.